Paris, 1895. The city glowed with gaslit boulevards, the echo of carriage wheels on cobblestones, and the low murmur of cafes where poets, painters, and philosophers argued late into the night. From the outside, this was the Paris of light and brilliance, home to the Belle Epoque, a period of optimism, technological progress, and breathtaking art. Yet beneath this dazzling veneer of culture and refinement, another Paris existed. It was a city obsessed with shadows, where seances, secret societies, and whispers of forbidden knowledge pulsed through the salons of the wealthy and the minds of the restless. For those willing to step beyond the ordinary and into the arcane, Paris was a gateway, a place where science and superstition danced hand in hand, and where the boundary between reality and the supernatural seemed thinner than anywhere else in Europe. It was here that the Golden Dawn Society arrived, a secretive brotherhood born in England but transplanted to France by one of its most eccentric leaders. Outwardly, it presented itself as a scholarly order, drawing from the ancient traditions of Hermeticism, alchemy, and mysticism. But behind closed doors, the order conducted elaborate rituals filled with robes, sigils, incantations, and oaths of silence. To its followers, these ceremonies promised access to hidden wisdom, knowledge of the divine, the ability to command elemental forces, and perhaps even power over life and death itself. To outsiders, they looked like madness. And to those who dared to speak against them, the rituals were whispered to be dangerous, an invitation for spirits and forces that no human hand was meant to control. The year 1895 was especially significant. While Paris dazzled with exhibitions and technological marvels, deep inside dimly lit chambers a different kind of spectacle was unfolding. The Golden Dawn had brought its occult theater to the heart of Europe's most modern city. Members swore their allegiance not to kings or governments but to the pursuit of secret knowledge, guided by symbols, ancient texts, and the belief that the unseen world was just as real as the visible one. Every initiation, every ritual, was staged with theatrical precision. The flicker of candle flames on painted walls, the scent of incense curling through the air, the voices of men and women chanting invocations in unison. For those who took part, it was an intoxicating escape from the banality of daily life. For critics, it was nothing less than blasphemy, cloaked in exotic symbols. Parisian society itself seemed divided. On one side were skeptics and scientists, eager to expose superstition in the age of electricity and invention. On the other were artists, aristocrats, and seekers who hungered for something beyond material progress, who wanted mystery in an age that seemed to explain away everything with rationality. The Golden Dawn fed this hunger. It promised not only mystery but mastery, not merely belief but practice. Here, one could claim to touch the currents of hidden power, to command angels and demons, to glimpse truths that the Church, the Academy, and the state refused to acknowledge. To its initiates, the order was nothing less than a portal to the forbidden. But as with all secret orders, the more secrecy it kept, the more speculation grew around it. Whispers circulated of strange initiations, of rituals involving blood and sacrifice, of women and men stripped of identity as they donned robes and masks. Some claimed the Golden Dawn's leaders trafficked with forces beyond comprehension. Others suggested it was all theater, a performance designed to seduce the wealthy and powerful into loyalty. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the shadows. Yet it was in these shadows that the society thrived, drawing more curious souls into its orbit. Why, then, does this story matter? Because Paris in 1895 was not just a city of light, but a city of contrasts, where faith in progress collided with a desperate hunger for mystery. The Golden Dawn Society embodied this collision perfectly. It stood at the crossroads of science and superstition, art and ritual, ambition and fear. To study its presence in Paris is to understand how deeply the human spirit craves the unknown, even at the risk of courting darkness. And it is to glimpse the strange and macabre rituals that left a lasting scar on the history of the occult. This is not merely a tale of secret chambers and whispered invocations. It is a story of power, of who sought it, how they tried to seize it, and what they risked in the process. It is about the seduction of mystery in an age that pretended it no longer needed mystery. And above all, it is about the thin line between enlightenment and destruction, a line the Golden Dawn walked in the flickering light of Parisian candles. What they did in those hidden rooms in 1895 continues to echo today, in both occult practice and the darker corners of our collective imagination. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn did not appear in Paris by accident, nor was it born in the French imagination. Its roots stretched back across the Channel to Victorian England, where a strange combination of scholarship, mysticism, and a hunger for the hidden gave birth to one of the most influential occult societies in modern history. To understand the rituals that later haunted Paris in 1895, one must first understand the soil in which the Golden Dawn was planted. That soil was rich with the fragments of forgotten traditions, Hermetic philosophy from the Renaissance, Rosicrucian manifestos from the 17th century, alchemical texts that promise transformation, and Kabbalistic symbols said to map the very structure of the divine. These were the building blocks, and in 1888 3 Englishmen brought them together into a system that would change the face of Western esotericism. The first was William Wynne Westcott, a coroner by profession and a scholar of mystical texts by passion. He was a man caught between two worlds, the rational, clinical world of Victorian science and the dreamlike realm of magical manuscripts. Alongside him stood William Robert Woodman, a respected Freemason and physician, whose interests in Rosicrucianism provided both authority and structure. The third was Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis, a brilliant yet eccentric visionary whose appetite for ritual and pageantry would give the order its dramatic flair. Together, they claimed to have discovered ancient documents, cipher manuscripts, that outlined secret magical rituals and initiations. These manuscripts, they insisted, were the direct lineage of forgotten Rosicrucian wisdom. Whether this discovery was genuine or manufactured remains a matter of fierce debate among historians. Yet in the late 19th century, when mystery carried more weight than proof, such claims were more than enough to ignite imaginations. From the start, the Golden Dawn was unlike other esoteric groups of its time. Freemasonry had long held sway among Europe's secret orders, but it was restricted, hierarchical, and rooted in allegorical morality. The Golden Dawn, by contrast, offered something far more enticing, actual magic. Not mere symbols, but rituals designed to invoke angels, banish demons, and align the initiate with the forces of the cosmos. Its structure was clear and seductive, grades of initiation based on the Kabbalistic tree of life, each promising deeper access to hidden knowledge. The novice entered as a neophyte, working their way upward through stages linked to the elements of earth, air, water, and fire, before reaching the higher mysteries of adeptship. Every step was theatrical, imbued with robes, symbols, oaths, and secret words. It was religion without dogma, science without laboratories, theatre without an audience. Yet to its members, it was more real than anything the outside world could offer. By the 1890s, the Golden Dawn was flourishing in Britain. Temples had been established in London and beyond, drawing an eclectic mix of the curious and the ambitious. Doctors, lawyers, poets, and aristocrats stood side by side, united by their thirst for the unseen. Among them was the Irish poet W.B. Yeats, whose mystical experiences would later infuse his poetry with haunting imagery. Others included artists, actors, and seekers of every kind. The allure was not merely the promise of wisdom but the intoxicating sense of belonging to a hidden elite, a brotherhood, and, uniquely for the time, also a sisterhood, that transcended the rigid boundaries of Victorian society. For women especially, the Golden Dawn offered something rare, equal access to leadership and initiation. At a time when most social clubs barred them outright, here they could wield magical authority, command ritual, and explore their own spiritual power. Yet while the Golden Dawn was thriving in England, cracks were beginning to appear. Ambition, ego, and the inevitable friction of secrecy were already stirring beneath the surface. And it was Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis who became the lightning rod for both inspiration and conflict. Unlike his fellow founders, Mathis hungered for more than quiet study. He craved spectacle. His rituals were grand, his imagination boundless, and his personality domineering. To many, he was the living embodiment of the Order's mysteries. To others, he was dangerously arrogant. When he moved to Paris in the mid-1890s, he brought not only the teachings of the Golden Dawn but also his own vision of what the society could become, more dramatic, more powerful, and more dangerous. Mathis' relocation to Paris would prove pivotal. Here was a city already teeming with occult fascination, a place where mystics, spiritualists, and charlatans rubbed shoulders in the salons of Montmartre and the libraries of the Sorbonne. Paris offered him not only new disciples but a stage on which to perform. And in this new theatre, the Golden Dawn would take on a distinctly continental flavour. It was no longer just an English experiment in ritual magic. It was becoming an international phenomenon, draped in the mystique of Parisian decadence. In the hands of Mathis and his wife Moyna, the society's identity shifted from scholarly curiosity to a kind of occult aristocracy, complete with costumes, pageantry, and rumours of rituals that blurred the line between enlightenment and heresy. The origins of the Golden Dawn thus reveal a paradox. It was at once scholarly and theatrical, intellectual and visceral, steeped in history yet constantly reinventing itself. Its founders borrowed freely from older traditions, stitching together fragments of Hermetic texts, Masonic structure, Kabbalistic symbolism, and magical practice into something entirely new. They claimed ancient authority, yet what they created was modern, a reflection of Victorian hunger for mystery in an age increasingly dominated by rational science. It was this blend of old and new, of authority and invention, that made the Golden Dawn so compelling to its members and so unsettling to its critics. And as it crossed the Channel into Paris, it carried with it not only these contradictions but also the seeds of the scandals and conflicts that would eventually tear it apart. By the time 1895 arrived, Paris was primed for its arrival. The Golden Dawn had grown from a curious English society into a force that threatened to shake the very foundations of how people understood knowledge, faith, and power. What began with 3 men and a set of mysterious manuscripts had become something far larger, an international order that promised to open doors to the invisible. But as history would soon show, some doors are better left unopened. Paris in 1895 was a city unlike any other in the world, a crossroads where modernity and mysticism collided in equal measure. On the surface, it was the jewel of the Belle Epoque, dazzling with electric street lamps, Art Nouveau architecture, and a cultural confidence that made it the beating heart of Europe. The cafes along the Boulevard Saint-Germain buzzed with conversation, the cabarets of Montmartre pulsed with music, dance, and satire, and the grand boulevards shimmered with fashion, invention, and wealth. To the casual visitor, Paris was alive with progress, embodying the optimism of a new age. But just beneath this glittering facade lurked another Paris, one steeped in shadows, where curiosity about the occult, the supernatural, and the forbidden thrived just as vigorously as its art and science. The late 19th century was an era of contradictions. On one hand, scientific progress was rewriting the boundaries of human understanding. Electricity was transforming homes and streets, the first automobiles rattled through the city, and advances in medicine promised to defeat diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. On the other hand, this march of progress left many people spiritually adrift. Traditional religion no longer satisfied a generation of thinkers who were disillusioned by institutional faith but still yearned for transcendence. The occult offered answers, or at least the promise of them. It provided a world where science had not yet stripped away the mystery, where ancient symbols and secret knowledge could offer meaning in ways that rationality never could. For many Parisians in 1895, the occult was not just entertainment but a lifeline. Spiritualism, which had swept across Europe decades earlier, was still alive in the salons of Paris. Séances became fashionable gatherings where mediums claimed to summon the spirits of the dead. Darkened rooms filled with the sound of table raps, mysterious knocks, and trembling voices said to be messages from beyond. Some sessions were obvious theatre, complete with floating trumpets and gauzy ectoplasm. Yet others left hardened skeptics shaken, unable to explain what they had seen. For Parisians who had lost loved ones in epidemics, wars, or the ordinary tragedies of life, these séances offered comfort, however illusory. But more than comfort, they hinted at the possibility of a hidden world waiting to be tapped, one that societies like the Golden Dawn promised to access with greater authority and control. The fascination with the supernatural extended far beyond the drawing rooms. Artists of the symbolist movement, restless with realism and impressionism, sought inspiration in myth, mysticism, and dreamlike imagery. Writers such as Karl Wismans and poets like Stephen Mallarmé explored themes of decadence, Satanism, and the uncanny, weaving occult symbolism into their works. The stage, too, reflected this obsession. At the Théâtre du Grand Guignol, audiences flocked to witness grotesque plays of horror and violence, spectacles that blurred the boundary between performance and ritual. In Montmartre's cabarets, satirical sketches often poked fun at séances, while others indulged in eerie, ritualistic dances under flickering lights. Everywhere, from high art to low entertainment, Paris was haunted by the occult imagination. What made Paris unique was its ability to absorb both science and mysticism without contradiction. Universities and scientific societies hosted lectures on astronomy, physics, and biology, while just a few streets away, esoteric lodges gathered to practice alchemy and ceremonial magic. It was not unusual for a physician, philosopher, or artist to be seen attending both worlds. A rational lecture one evening, a secret ritual the next. The intellectual elite debated Darwin's theories while privately poring over grimoires. This paradox was part of Paris's allure, a place where one could believe in progress and yet still yearn for mystery. Into this environment arrived Samuel Little MacGregor Mathis and his wife Moyna. bringing with them the teachings of the Golden Dawn. For them, Paris was fertile ground. The city was already crowded with occult circles, Rosicrucians, theosophists, spiritualists, and self-styled magicians. Yet the Golden Dawn distinguished itself by offering not vague promises of contacting the dead, but a structured system of initiation, ritual, and supposed mastery over the unseen. To a city buzzing with curiosity, this was irresistible. The Golden Dawn represented the next step beyond parlor games and seances, an organized attempt to seize power from the spiritual realm, rather than merely glimpse it. The contrast between the Paris of light and the Paris of shadows gave the society its stage. By day, the boulevards blazed with modern wonders, cinematographs, electric lights, and phonographs that captured sound itself. By night, behind shuttered windows and heavy curtains, initiates donned robes embroidered with mystical symbols, preparing to enact ceremonies that claimed to summon elemental forces. To the uninitiated, this duality might seem absurd. But to those within it, there was no contradiction at all. Progress illuminated the outer world. Ritual illuminated the inner one. In 1895, the hunger for the occult was not merely curiosity, it was part of a deeper cultural crisis. Industrial progress had changed how people lived, worked, and even thought. Yet the human soul demanded more than factories, wires, and inventions. In Paris, the occult became a mirror for these anxieties, reflecting both the hope for hidden wisdom and the fear of forces beyond control. The Golden Dawn's arrival in this city at this precise moment was no coincidence. It was drawn like a moth to flame, seeking disciples among those who believed that the world of spirits, symbols, and rituals was just as real as the glowing lamps along the Champs-Élysées. This Paris of contradictions, modern yet mystical, scientific yet superstitious, was the perfect stage for the Golden Dawn's experiments. The society promised not only to reveal hidden truths but to grant mastery over them. In a city of dreamers, skeptics, artists, and seekers, this promise was intoxicating. And as 1895 unfolded, the Golden Dawn would entangle itself with Parisian culture in ways both enthralling and dangerous, forever binding the city's story with the legacy of the occult. Behind the shimmering surface of Paris in 1895, where theaters, cafes, and electric lights dazzled the crowds, something far more secretive was unfolding in dim, hidden chambers. Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis, recently arrived from London with his wife Moyna, had chosen this city as the stage for a bold new experiment, the creation of a Parisian temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This temple, known as the Ahathua Temple, was no ordinary gathering place. It was a sanctuary of symbols and silence, where elaborate rituals were staged with the precision of theatre but the seriousness of religion. For those allowed entry, it was a space where the veil between the mundane and the mystical was not simply acknowledged, it was actively torn aside. Locating the temple was, by design, difficult. Some whispered it operated in a modest apartment near the Rue Mozart. Others claimed it was hidden in the shadowed streets of Montparnasse. Whatever the truth, secrecy was paramount. No sign marked its entrance. No public invitation welcomed the curious. To step inside required initiation, and initiation required both sponsorship and submission. Candidates swore oaths of silence that bound them for life, pledging never to reveal what they saw or heard within. For the Golden Dawn, secrecy was not simply a practical necessity but a sacred principle, for the hidden was always more powerful than the revealed. The temple itself was a carefully constructed stage of symbolism. At first glance, a visitor might have mistaken it for a theatrical set. Walls draped in heavy curtains embroidered with mystical sigils, altars positioned with mathematical precision, and strange objects arranged on pedestals. Candles flickered against painted emblems of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, each representing not just natural forces but stages of initiation. At the center stood a great altar, often covered with ritual implements, swords to command, wands to direct, cups to invoke, and pentacles to ground. Every object had meaning. Nothing was accidental. Even the colors of the robes worn by initiates corresponded to esoteric principles, turning the chamber into a living diagram of mystical truths. Mathis, with his love for drama, transformed the rituals of the Golden Dawn into near-operatic performances. He took the cipher manuscripts and earlier ceremonial practices and infused them with a distinctly theatrical energy. Initiations were choreographed sequences, filled with processions, chants, and gestures. A blindfolded candidate would be led into the chamber, surrounded by masked figures who represented the forces of the cosmos. At key moments, words of power were spoken, words drawn from Hebrew, Greek, and Egyptian sources, stitched together into a tapestry of ancient authority. The air was thick with incense, the atmosphere deliberately overwhelming. To the initiate, the experience was disorienting, frightening, and awe-inspiring, designed to strip away ordinary identity and replace it with a new, esoteric self. The structure of the Paris temple followed the hierarchical grades of the order. A novice entered as a neophyte, symbolically in darkness, before progressing through levels associated with the elements. Earth tested stability and endurance, air challenged intellect and imagination, water demanded emotional balance, fire ignited will and passion. Each stage required not only ritual participation but the study of dense texts, Kabbalah, astrology, tarot, and alchemy. Knowledge was not offered freely but earned, step by step, ascent by ascent. The higher one climbed, the deeper the mysteries became, until the initiate reached the level of Adeptus Minor, where they were said to confront their own higher self in a rite of inner transformation. For Mathis, this was no metaphor. He believed the rituals literally aligned human beings with divine and cosmic forces. The Paris temple also reflected the unique character of its leaders. Moina Mathis, an accomplished artist and clairvoyant, played a central role in the ceremonies. She designed ritual regalia, painted symbolic diagrams, and acted as a medium during visionary work. Together, she and Samuel embodied the dual authority of masculine and feminine forces, presenting themselves almost as priest and priestess in a living myth. To their disciples, they radiated authority and mystery. To critics, they seemed dangerously delusional, weaving together fantasy and fraud. Yet no one could deny the sheer magnetism of their presence, especially within the charged atmosphere of the Ahathua temple. What happened in those secret chambers remains partly hidden by the oaths of secrecy sworn by members, but fragments of testimony have leaked through diaries, letters, and later betrayals. Some described initiations as deeply transformative, awakening a sense of spiritual power they had never before imagined. Others remembered fear and unease, feeling as though invisible presences had truly been called into the room. There were whispers of rituals in which members claimed to invoke angelic beings, calling down light into the temple. There were also darker rumors that Mathis experimented with invoking demonic entities, or that certain ceremonies skirted dangerously close to forbidden practices of necromancy and blood magic. Whether true or exaggerated, such stories only added to the aura of dread surrounding the Paris temple. What is certain is that the Ahathua temple served as a hub for the Parisian occult community. It drew artists, intellectuals, and seekers who wanted more than parlor tricks and carnival seances. Unlike the theatrical spiritualists who entertained audiences with floating tables and ghostly voices, the Golden Dawn presented itself as serious, disciplined, and scholarly. Its rituals were not spectacles for the crowd but private dramas for the chosen few. In this exclusivity lay its power. To be admitted was to join a hidden elite, a group who believed they stood apart from ordinary society because they had glimpsed truths too dangerous for the masses. For outsiders, however, the secrecy bred suspicion. To journalists and skeptics, the temple was little more than a cult, manipulating gullible followers with smoke, mirrors, and exotic words. To the Catholic Church, it was blasphemous, a revival of heresies long condemned. To rival occultists, it was competition, threatening to eclipse their own societies with its bold claims. Paris thus became a city of rumor, where stories of the Golden Dawn ceremonies circulated like whispered ghost tales, each retelling darker than the last. The Paris temple, then, was more than a physical space. It was a crucible where mysticism, ambition, and performance merged into a single, volatile force. Behind its closed doors, the rituals of the Golden Dawn promised transcendence, power, and knowledge. Outside, they stirred suspicion, fascination, and fear. And as the order grew in Paris, so too did the shadows surrounding it, shadows that would eventually consume the very society Mathis had sought to build. The true heart of the Golden Dawn, and the reason it has lingered in the imagination of occult history, is found not in its organizational structure or lofty theories but in its rituals. These ceremonies were the order's lifeblood, the dramatic performances through which members claimed to access hidden forces, elevate their spiritual rank, and even manipulate the unseen world. For the Paris temple in 1895, the rituals were not simply symbolic, they were experiences designed to shock, overwhelm, and transform. To participate in them was to step into a world where nothing was ordinary and every gesture, every word, carried cosmic significance. Initiation was always the beginning. A candidate seeking entry into the Golden Dawn underwent a carefully orchestrated drama meant to strip away their sense of identity and rebuild it according to the Order's arcane system. Blindfolded, They were led into a chamber filled with robed figures, the air thick with incense. The silence of the room was broken only by the sound of ritual footsteps or the low hum of invocations in strange tongues. At various stages, the candidate was challenged by symbolic guardians, officers of the temple representing divine forces. They were asked to swear oaths of secrecy, to affirm their dedication to the path of hidden knowledge, and to symbolically pass through trials of the elements. In one moment, a sword might be pressed against their chest. In another, they might be surrounded by flames of candles, representing the purifying fire. To an outsider, it would have looked like elaborate theatre. To the initiate, it was often terrifying, for the combination of sensory deprivation, solemn oaths, and overwhelming pageantry was designed to break through ordinary perception and induce a state of mystical awe. Once initiated, members progressed through grades linked to the elements: earth, air, water, and fire. Each grade brought new rituals, each more complex than the last. The ritual of the pentagram, for example, was a central practice, teaching initiates how to invoke and banish elemental forces. With precise gestures, tracing glowing symbols in the air, members claimed they could command energies of protection or open gateways to higher realities. The air would resound with divine names spoken in Hebrew and Greek, names drawn from Kabbalistic texts and ancient grimoires. These sounds, chanted in unison, carried a hypnotic power, echoing off the temple walls until initiates felt as though unseen presences had joined them in the room. The tools of the Golden Dawn rituals were just as significant. The sword symbolized willpower and authority, the wand, direction of energy, the chalice, receptivity and the element of water, the pentacle, grounding, and earth. Each was carefully consecrated before use, often inscribed with sigils or divine names. Robes of specific colors were worn depending on rank and ritual, transforming participants into living embodiments of the cosmic principles they invoked. Masks were sometimes used, heightening the sense of anonymity and otherworldliness. Everything was choreographed to create an atmosphere in which participants felt they were standing on the threshold of another reality. But it was not only light and angelic presences that were called upon. Whispers soon spread that in Paris, Mathis and his disciples pushed the rituals into darker territory. Some accounts suggest that alongside invocations of archangels and divine forces, the Paris temple experimented with ceremonies that bordered on necromancy, summoning the spirits of the dead not for comfort, but for command. Others claimed that Mathis had incorporated elements of grimoires such as the Key of Solomon, and even fragments of black magical traditions. There were rumors of blood being used in rituals, whether symbolic drops from pricked fingers or more disturbing offerings. These tales, difficult to verify, circulated widely and gave the Golden Dawn an aura of danger. To believers, the order was powerful because it was willing to walk close to the edge. To critics, it was proof of blasphemy, a descent into sorcery. Central to many Golden Dawn ceremonies was the invocation of higher beings, entities described alternately as angels, elemental spirits, or even gods. The rituals drew heavily from the Kabbalah, mapping spiritual ascent onto the tree of life, with each sephira representing a stage of consciousness and divine power. In certain ceremonies, initiates claimed to channel visions of luminous figures, messengers of light that offered guidance or tests. Yet just as often, the experience could be unsettling, with visions of shadowy figures or oppressive atmospheres that suggested darker forces had been stirred. Participants were warned of these dangers. They were told that the rituals were not mere symbols, but real openings into invisible realms, and that missteps could attract entities that were anything but benevolent. One of the most controversial practices associated with the Golden Dawn, particularly in Paris, was the use of sex and desire in ritual. While little documented with certainty, later testimonies and rival accounts suggested that Mathis experimented with ceremonies in which sexual energy was harnessed as a magical force. This idea was not unique to him. Many occult traditions have viewed sexuality as a gateway to transcendence, but in Catholic Paris, such whispers were explosive. Even the suggestion that ritual nudity or erotic symbolism might have been part of Golden Dawn ceremonies was enough to scandalize polite society. Whether these stories were exaggerated by enemies or based in truth, they added fuel to the society's sinister reputation. Another layer of power came from the secrecy surrounding the rituals. Members swore upon their very lives to keep the ceremonies hidden from outsiders. Violating the oath meant spiritual ruin, perhaps even curses from the order itself. This secrecy magnified the effect of the rituals, for the less the outside world knew, the more its imagination supplied the horror. A single leak about blood sacrifice, or a whispered tale of necromancy, spread like wildfire through the cafes and salons of Paris. Each retelling grew darker, until the Golden Dawn was no longer just an esoteric society but a suspected cult of forbidden magic operating in the heart of the city. And yet, for those inside, the rituals were not monstrous but transcendent. Members described feelings of immense clarity, of standing in the presence of divine forces, of glimpsing realities beyond the visible world. Some spoke of astral journeys, their souls leaving their bodies to travel across mystical landscapes. Others claimed prophetic visions, seeing glimpses of events yet to come. For them, the rituals justified the secrecy, the oaths, the sacrifices. Whatever the outside world thought, they believed they were touching the divine, and that belief bound them tighter than any chain. The rituals of the Golden Dawn in Paris, then, were a paradox. To initiates, they were sacred gateways to higher knowledge. To critics, they were dangerous games with forces that should never be summoned. And to historians, they remain a mixture of fact and legend, theatre and mystery, impossible to fully disentangle. What is certain is that these ceremonies, charged with symbolism, secrecy, and power, became the defining feature of the Paris Temple. They gave the order its allure, its danger, and ultimately its downfall, for the darker the rituals became, the harder it was to separate truth from rumor, faith from fear. In the flicker of candlelight, in the echo of strange chants, in the press of oaths spoken with trembling voices, the rituals of the Golden Dawn in Paris carved themselves into history. Whether they summoned angels or shadows, whether they brought enlightenment or ruin, they remain the most vivid glimpse into the society's heart. And for those who stepped into that temple in 1895, they were unforgettable, an encounter with the occult that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Golden Dawn in Paris was not simply defined by its rituals or its temple walls, it was shaped by the individuals who gave it life. Every society, no matter how secret, is a reflection of the personalities within it, and the Golden Dawn attracted some of the most fascinating, eccentric, and often volatile figures of its age. Their obsessions, rivalries, and visions were as much a part of the order's drama as the candles and symbols of its ceremonies. In Paris, 1895, these figures burned brightly, each carrying their own hunger for knowledge, power, or transcendence. At the center stood Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis, the architect of the Paris Temple. Tall, imposing, and flamboyant, Mathis was as much a showman as he was a mystic. He relished the theatrical dimension of ritual, appearing in elaborate robes embroidered with symbols, wielding swords, and intoning invocations in a booming voice. To his disciples, he radiated authority. To his critics, he was a tyrant intoxicated by his own pageantry. Mathis had long cultivated an aura of mystery around himself, claiming descent from Highland clans and adopting the MacGregor name to emphasize a supposed lineage of ancient nobility. In truth, he came from far humbler origins, but in the world of occultism, myth often mattered more than fact. For Mathis, identity itself was a ritual, a carefully staged performance that convinced others of his power. Mathis' intellectual contributions were significant. He translated ancient grimoires, such as the Key of Solomon and the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which became foundational texts for modern ceremonial magic. He believed fervently in the ability of ritual to connect humans with divine and elemental forces, and he built the Golden Dawn's Paris Temple into a living expression of those beliefs. Yet his hunger for control was just as powerful as his hunger for knowledge. Mathis brooked no dissent. Those who questioned his authority often found themselves silenced, expelled, or denounced. He thrived on loyalty, surrounding himself with disciples who treated him as both a teacher and a figure of almost spiritual kingship. Beside him was his wife, Moina Mathis, born Mina Bergson. Moina was not a mere companion but an indispensable partner in shaping the Parisian Golden Dawn. A talented artist and the sister of the philosopher Henri Bergson, Moina brought both creativity and credibility to the order. She designed ritual regalia, painted magical diagrams, and lent her artistic eye to the visual richness of the ceremonies. But she was more than an artist. Moina was also a visionary and clairvoyant, often taking on the role of seer during rituals. Accounts describe her falling into trances, speaking with voices not her own, and delivering messages said to come from spiritual intelligences. Her presence added an aura of feminine mysticism to the Paris Temple, balancing Samuel's authoritarian leadership with an element of inspired, otherworldly guidance. Together, they were the high priest and priestess of the order, embodying the dual currents of masculine will and feminine vision. Beyond the Mathis, the Paris Temple drew other remarkable figures. Perhaps the most notorious was Aleister Crowley, who, though not permanently based in Paris during 1895, became entangled with the Golden Dawn soon after. Crowley's reputation as the Great Beast would come later, But even in the mid-1890s he was already marked by ambition, arrogance, and a taste for the forbidden. He entered the Golden Dawn as a novice in London but soon clashed with other leaders, particularly Yeats and the more conservative members. In Paris, Crowley found an ally in Mathis, who saw in the young man both promise and danger. Their alliance would not last. By the early 1900s, their feud became one of the most infamous schisms in occult history, filled with lawsuits, magical duels, and bitter accusations. Yet even in 1895, the seeds of that rivalry were present, as Crowley's restless spirit pushed against the boundaries of tradition. Another figure tied to the order was William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet whose mystical leanings found a home in the Golden Dawn. Yeats was less directly connected to the Paris Temple than to its London counterpart, but his involvement illustrates the caliber of minds the society attracted. For Yeats, ritual was not just performance but a means of accessing archetypal truths that later shape his poetry. His presence added intellectual weight to the order, even as his clashes with Crowley highlighted the deep divisions within it. In the larger web of the Golden Dawn, Yeats symbolized the artistic seeker, someone drawn less by the promise of power and more by the hunger for beauty and meaning hidden within mystical systems. Within the Paris circle itself, there were aristocrats, artists, and scholars whose names have faded into obscurity but whose roles were no less important. Wealthy patrons lent financial support, fascinated by the promise of esoteric knowledge. Bohemian artists found in the rituals a new kind of inspiration, blending occult imagery into their work. For women especially, the Golden Dawn offered a rare form of empowerment. Unlike Freemasonry and most secret societies of the time, the order admitted women as equals, allowing them to rise to positions of authority and to lead rituals. This was revolutionary in the patriarchal society of the Belle Epoque, and it gave the Paris Temple a magnetic appeal for women who craved more than the roles society allowed them. But with such diverse figures came inevitable conflict. Mathis demanded absolute obedience, yet many members bristled at his heavy hand. Crowley's brashness and scandalous behavior clashed with the sensibilities of more restrained intellectuals like Yeats. Moyner's visionary trances were revered by some but dismissed by others as hysteria. The result was a volatile mixture of egos and obsessions, each pulling the order in different directions. At times, the temple seemed less like a unified society and more like a stage on which personal dramas were acted out under the guise of ritual. These figures, with their eccentricities and obsessions, gave the Paris Golden Dawn both its brilliance and its instability. They infused the rituals with passion, artistry, and ambition, but they also planted the seeds of betrayal and collapse. The society's history cannot be separated from theirs. Mathis' authoritarian vision, Moyner's artistic mysticism, Crowley's unrelenting ambition, Yeats's poetic hunger, and the quiet contributions of countless unnamed seekers, all came together in the Paris Temple of 1895, creating a society at once luminous and dangerous. The Golden Dawn was not merely a set of texts or symbols. It was a living drama performed by flesh and blood people, each with their own flaws and obsessions. And as the years passed, those obsessions would collide in increasingly dramatic fashion, leading to scandals, betrayals, and the eventual fracturing of the order itself. From the moment the Golden Dawn expanded into Paris, its foundation was already trembling. Secret societies thrive on unity, on the trust that sworn oaths of silence will bind their members together. But they also attract strong personalities, visionaries, egotists, rebels, who chafe under authority. The Paris Temple, presided over by Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis and his wife Moyner, became a magnet for both devotion and dissent. By 1895, what had begun as a flourishing esoteric order was sliding toward chaos, undone by scandals, betrayals, and internal warfare that exposed the fragility of its mystical empire. The seeds of discord lay partly in Mathis himself. His authoritarian style, which worked to impress novices, quickly alienated seasoned initiates. In London, members already whispered that he demanded too much control, interpreting the ancient cipher manuscripts as though only he could unlock their meaning. When he moved to Paris, the distance only deepened suspicions. Communication between the London and Paris temples became fraught, letters thick with accusations and counter-accusations. Mathis insisted that he alone had the authority of the mysterious secret chiefs, the supposed higher, invisible masters who guided the order. But others doubted their existence, suggesting that Mathis had conjured them from his own imagination to justify his dominance. In a society built on secrecy and trust, such doubts were poison. The Paris Temple, meanwhile, developed its own set of scandals. Members loyal to Mathis swore that their initiations were transformative, but outsiders and defectors painted a darker picture. Some alleged that Mathis demanded blind obedience not just in ritual but in personal matters, blurring the line between spiritual guidance and manipulation. There were rumors of financial exploitation, with wealthy members pressured to make donations in exchange for advancement. Others accused him of fostering a cult of personality, elevating himself as a prophet whose word was beyond question. In Parisian society, where gossip was a currency, such stories spread quickly. The Golden Dawn was whispered about in cafes and salons, its rituals transformed in retellings into sinister spectacles of blood and blasphemy. The greatest betrayal, however, came from within. Aleister Crowley, still a rising figure in the order, played a pivotal role in the unraveling. Though not permanently stationed in Paris in 1895, his ambition brought him frequently into Mathis' orbit. Crowley admired Mathis at first, seeing in him a fellow visionary unafraid to wield power. But admiration quickly soured into rivalry. Crowley sought advancement at a pace that alarmed other members, demanding initiations into higher grades before he had truly earned them. When London leaders resisted, Crowley turned to Mathis in Paris, who granted him special privileges. This decision outraged the London Temple, deepening the fracture between the two branches. By siding with Crowley, Mathis alienated many of his most loyal supporters, setting the stage for an infamous showdown. That showdown erupted in 1900, though its origins were rooted in the tensions of the mid-1890s. The London Temple, weary of Mathis' authoritarian rule, effectively rebelled. Members accused him of fabricating the authority of the secret chiefs and of misusing his position for personal gain. They severed ties with him, declaring independence from his leadership. In response, Mathis doubled down, insisting that Paris was now the true seat of the Golden Dawn, with himself as its unquestioned head. Crowley, ever the opportunist, attempted to seize control of the London Temple on Mathis' behalf, arriving in full ceremonial regalia to assert his authority. He was locked out, the doors barred against him, in one of the most theatrical moments in the history of occult societies. The order that had once prided itself on unity had split into factions, its sacred bonds shattered by mistrust. The betrayal cut deeper than simple politics. For members who had devoted themselves to the rituals and teachings of the Golden Dawn, the infighting felt like a desecration. Oaths sworn under candlelight, with swords and wands raised toward heaven, had promised eternal loyalty. Now those oaths lay in tatters, their sanctity mocked by the petty squabbles of egos. Some members left in disgust, abandoning occult study altogether. Others splintered into rival groups, each claiming to carry the true torch of the Golden Dawn's wisdom. Paris, London, and other temples became isolated fortresses, locked in feuds that consumed more energy than the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. Public scandal soon followed. Newspapers caught wind of the disputes, delighting in tales of magical jewels, secret rituals, and the eccentricities of Mathis and Crowley. One London paper mocked the order as a sect of ridiculous wizards, painting its members as deluded dreamers in fancy dress. Yet the ridicule only sharpened the aura of danger around the Paris temple. For every skeptic who dismissed the Golden Dawn as absurd, there was another who feared that its ceremonies might indeed harbor sinister power. The society was no longer simply secret. It was notorious. What makes this period of scandal so striking is how quickly devotion turned to betrayal. Men and women who once stood side by side in ritual now denounced each other as frauds and traitors. Mathis, once the unifying figure, became the villain in the eyes of many of his former disciples. Crowley, who began as his protege, emerged as his rival. Even Moyna, who had stood faithfully at her husband's side, grew increasingly embattled as she defended him against a chorus of detractors. The very structure of the Golden Dawn, with its emphasis on hierarchy and secrecy, seemed to invite these explosions. For in a system where authority rests on hidden masters and unverifiable claims, betrayal is always waiting in the shadows. By the end of the century, the Golden Dawn was a fractured body. The Paris temple still flickered under Mathis' leadership, but it was weakened by scandal and isolation. The London temple operated independently, stripped of its former grandeur, and the order's reputation, once a beacon for seekers of wisdom, was forever stained by the betrayals of its leaders. The rituals still carried power, the teaching still fascinated, but the trust that bound the order together had been broken. The story of the Golden Dawn in Paris is thus inseparable from its scandals. They were not incidental but inevitable, born from the very obsessions that had fueled its rise. Ambition, secrecy, hunger for power, all were present from the beginning, and all eventually consumed the society from within. In the end, The Golden Dawn's greatest enemies were not the skeptics or the church, but its own members, tearing each other apart in the pursuit of authority. And in those betrayals, the Order revealed its truest ritual, the eternal drama of human ambition, cloaked in the language of magic but driven by the same flaws that haunt every society, secret or not. In 1895, Paris was not only the epicenter of art and modern culture. It was also a city where the boundaries between the respectable and the forbidden blurred in salons, drawing rooms, and behind closed curtains. The Golden Dawn, with its air of secrecy and promises of hidden knowledge, fit perfectly into this climate. For the city's elite, its aristocrats, wealthy patrons, writers, and artists, membership in or association with such an order was more than a spiritual pursuit. It was a symbol of sophistication, daring, and rebellion against the rigid structures of society. Within Parisian high society, the occult was not an embarrassment. It was a fashion, and the Golden Dawn provided one of the most exclusive tickets into this world of shadows. The fascination with the occult in Parisian salons had already been primed by decades of spiritualism. Wealthy hostesses frequently held séances as social amusements, inviting mediums to summon the spirits of the dead for after-dinner entertainment. Guests included aristocrats, politicians, and even scientists, who approached the spectacle with equal parts skepticism and awe. The Golden Dawn's arrival offered a new, more structured alternative to this parlor mysticism. Unlike the flimsy tricks of some mediums, the Golden Dawn presented itself as a scholarly and disciplined order rooted in ancient traditions. This seriousness made it especially appealing to intellectuals and artists who longed for something deeper than carnival spectacle. Writers and poets of the symbolist movement found fertile ground in the Golden Dawn's imagery. The order's rituals drew heavily from Kabbalah, Hermetic philosophy, and Egyptian symbolism, all of which resonated with the symbolists' fascination with the hidden and the transcendent. Figures such as Josephine Paladin, founder of the Salon de la Rose plus Croix, moved in similar circles, blending Catholic mysticism with occult themes in his exhibitions of art and music. Though not formally tied to the Golden Dawn, Paladin's influence demonstrates how deeply intertwined the Parisian avant-garde was with esoteric thought. Painters such as Gustave Moreau and Odilon Redon, with their dreamlike and mystical imagery, captured the same atmosphere that Golden Dawn rituals evoked: visions of gods, angels, demons, and archetypal symbols. For these artists, the occult was not just superstition but an aesthetic, a language of mystery that fueled their creativity. Among the wealthy, participation in or association with occult societies was often a mark of distinction. To say that one had witnessed a Golden Dawn initiation, or had spoken with Samuel or Moina Mathis, was to suggest access to knowledge denied to the ordinary masses. In a city obsessed with status, where salons competed for the most exotic entertainments and intellectual conversations, the Golden Dawn's aura of secrecy was irresistible. Aristocratic patrons provided financial support, sometimes donating spaces for rituals or offering protection against police scrutiny. These patrons were not naive. Many were keenly aware of the rumors surrounding the order's darker practices. But the very danger of those rumors, the suggestion of forbidden power, only heightened its allure. The influence of the Golden Dawn reached beyond the private salons into the world of public performance. The Théâtre du Grand Guignol, famous for its grotesque and horrifying plays, drew inspiration from the same atmosphere of occult fascination that surrounded the order. While the Grand Guignol was primarily theatrical horror, its shocking spectacles of blood, madness, and ritual violence echoed the whispered stories of what the Golden Dawn enacted behind closed doors. In Montmartre's cabarets, performances featuring occult themes became increasingly common. Dancers and actors donned robes, masks, and mystical symbols, parodying or paying homage to the secret orders that everyone gossiped about but few truly understood. For the audience, these performances were a safe way to taste the forbidden, a theatrical echo of rituals they would never be invited to witness in reality. The Catholic Church, still a powerful force in French society, viewed this flirtation with the occult with alarm. Clergymen warned from pulpits about the dangers of secret societies and their blasphemous practices. Pamphlets circulated, denouncing the Golden Dawn and other esoteric groups as gateways to Satanism. Yet the condemnations only added to the allure. For many in Parisian high society, dabbling in the occult became a subtle form of rebellion against the Church's authority. To explore these forbidden rituals was to assert independence, to demonstrate that one was modern, enlightened, and unafraid of old superstitions. In this sense, participation in the Golden Dawn was as much a social statement as a spiritual pursuit. Women in particular found the Golden Dawn uniquely appealing. The order's willingness to admit them as equals, allowing them to attain leadership roles and conduct rituals, was revolutionary compared to other societies of the time. For aristocratic women, often constrained by rigid social expectations, the Golden Dawn offered a rare space of empowerment. Within the temple, they could wield swords, command spirits, and lead ceremonies, roles unimaginable in the salons or the church. This egalitarian aspect of the order made it fashionable among progressive circles, and many women of influence became its stanchest defenders. Yet the society's integration into Parisian high life also fueled its downfall. The same salons that embraced the Golden Dawn as exotic entertainment were just as quick to turn on it when scandals arose. Gossip traveled fast, and accusations of black magic or immoral rituals spread like wildfire. Newspapers fed on these rumors, publishing sensational stories that blurred fact and fiction. For the aristocrats and artists who had once whispered proudly of their association with the Golden Dawn, the mounting scandals became a liability. Some quietly distanced themselves, while others defended the order even more fiercely, convinced that its persecution was proof of its power. Ultimately, the Golden Dawn's place in Parisian high society reflected the city's broader obsession with the occult. It was not simply a matter of belief but of culture, aesthetics, and rebellion. The order's rituals provided a secret theater for the elite, a space where they could indulge their fascination with mystery and danger while maintaining the outward respectability of Parisian sophistication. Even as scandals tarnished its name, the Golden Dawn left a deep imprint on the art, literature, and intellectual life of the city. Paris absorbed its imagery, whispered its rumors, and wove its presence into the fabric of the Belle Époque. By 1895, the Golden Dawn had become more than an esoteric society. It was a cultural phenomenon, a secret whispered in drawing rooms, a symbol painted in canvases, a theme performed on stage. High society both nourished and destroyed it, embracing its allure while fueling the scandals that would soon unravel it. The Paris Temple was not just a hidden chamber for initiates. It was a reflection of an entire city's hunger for mystery, its love of spectacle, and its fascination with the shadows that lurked just beyond the reach of electric light. The Golden Dawn's Paris Temple was already shrouded in secrecy, but what ensured its enduring notoriety were the rumors that surrounded its darkest alleged practices. For every carefully documented ritual of initiation or invocation, there were stories whispered in cafes and printed in sensationalist newspapers that described ceremonies far more sinister. Tales of blood, sex, necromancy, and forbidden rites clung to the Golden Dawn like smoke, impossible to dispel entirely. Yet historians still wrestle with the same question: how much of this was true, and how much was the fevered imagination of outsiders who saw danger in every shadow? The most persistent accusation was that the Paris Temple had crossed the line from ceremonial magic into black magic. Unlike the invocations of angelic names and the symbolic trials of initiation, black magic was understood as the direct summoning of demonic forces for personal gain. Critics claimed that Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis had grown reckless in his rituals, experimenting with summoning entities that even traditional grimoires warned against invoking. One particularly lurid rumor insisted that Mathis had conducted midnight ceremonies to conjure spirits of the dead, binding them to his will in order to gain knowledge or power. Witnesses who claimed to have seen these rites spoke of cold drafts sweeping through the temple, flickering lights, and the feeling of invisible presences pressing upon their chests. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or not, they cemented the image of the Golden Dawn as a society willing to traffic with darkness. Blood sacrifice was another claim that haunted the order. In a city where Catholic imagery still carried immense power, the suggestion that blood was spilled in a ritual context was deeply shocking. Some stories allege that the Paris Temple used animal blood to consecrate ritual tools or to empower magical circles. More scandalous whispers suggested that human blood, perhaps drops drawn from the initiates themselves, was offered during ceremonies. These rumors, repeated in hushed tones in salons and printed in mocking editorials, painted the Golden Dawn as little better than a cult of sorcerers. Yet the surviving records of the order offer no evidence of such practices, and most scholars believe these accusations were products of fear-mongering. Still, the idea of blood in the ritual chamber was too powerful a symbol to dismiss, and it lingered in the imagination of Parisians long after the order's decline. Sexual ritual was perhaps the most explosive allegation of all. While the Golden Dawn's official texts rarely mention sexuality, later accounts suggest that Mathis and some members experimented with the use of erotic energy in their ceremonies. The notion that sexual union could be harnessed as a magical force was not unique to the Golden Dawn. It had roots in older mystical traditions and would later be central to Aleister Crowley's system of thelema. But in the prudish yet secretly decadent atmosphere of Belle Époque Paris, such claims were dynamite. the image of men and women, aristocrats and artists alike, shedding their identities in ritual nudity and engaging in sexual acts under candlelight struck both fascination and horror. Whether these rituals actually occurred or whether they were fantasies projected by enemies, they became inseparable from the order's reputation. Necromancy was another accusation that fed the Golden Dawn's sinister image. Some defectors from the order claimed that Mathis encouraged experiments in contacting the dead not just through symbolic means but through direct, dangerous invocations. Paris, already enamored with spiritualism and seances, found these rumors believable. After all, if mediums and salons could claim to raise the spirits of the departed, why shouldn't a powerful occult order do the same on a grander scale? Yet where spiritualists claimed to comfort grieving families, the Golden Dawn was said to seek power. The distinction mattered greatly. To high society, necromancy was the darkest of arts, an attempt to violate the natural order by enslaving souls that should have been at rest. But were these stories true? Evidence suggests that much of what circulated in Parisian gossip was likely exaggerated, distorted, or even deliberately invented. Rival occult groups, such as the followers of Josephine Paladin or competing Masonic lodges, had every reason to tarnish the Golden Dawn's reputation. The Catholic Church, too, saw in these rumors an opportunity to warn the faithful against the dangers of secret societies. And the newspapers of the Belle Epoque thrived on scandal, often embellishing tales to sell copies. It is telling that many of the darkest allegations against the Golden Dawn appeared not in private diaries of members but in public denunciations and sensationalist reporting. Still, dismissing all of these stories as lies would be equally misleading. The Golden Dawn's rituals were undeniably theatrical, filled with symbolism that could easily be misinterpreted as sinister. A blindfolded initiate surrounded by masked figures holding swords might, to an outsider, look like a hostage about to be sacrificed. The chanting of divine names in strange languages might sound like demonic invocations to ears unfamiliar with Hebrew or Greek. And Mathis himself, with his love of drama and reputation for arrogance, seemed almost designed to attract scandal. Even if the Paris temple never spilled blood or engaged in erotic rites, the atmosphere of its ceremonies made such rumors plausible. It is also true that some members later recalled deeply unsettling experiences during rituals. While many described encounters with angelic visions or feelings of enlightenment, others reported oppressive atmospheres, terrifying visions, or sensations of being watched by hostile forces. These subjective accounts suggest that the rituals could indeed open psychological doors that some participants were ill-prepared to face. In an age when psychology was only just beginning to emerge as a discipline, such experiences were easily interpreted as supernatural. Whether demons or the subconscious, the terror felt in those rituals was real to those who experienced it. The line between fact and fear-mongering in the history of the Paris Golden Dawn is therefore blurred. On one side are the verifiable texts and practices, rituals of initiation, invocations of divine names, symbolic trials. On the other side are the rumors of blood, sex, and necromancy, stories amplified by enemies and the press. Between them lies a grey zone where perception, imagination, and suggestion played powerful roles. In a society obsessed with both science and the supernatural, even a whiff of scandal could transform whispers into legends. What is certain is that these alleged darker practices left a permanent stain on the Golden Dawn's reputation. Whether or not they were real, they define how the society was remembered. For outsiders, the Golden Dawn became synonymous with forbidden magic, a symbol of what happens when intellectuals and artists abandon reason for the lure of the occult. For believers, the persistence of these rumors was proof of the order's power. Why else would society fear it so much if it were not tapping into something real? In the end, the alleged darker practices of the Golden Dawn in Paris were as much about the fears of the society around it as they were about the rituals themselves. They reflected anxieties about modernity, about the loss of faith, about the hidden desires bubbling beneath the surface of respectability. The Golden Dawn became the canvas onto which Paris projected its darkest fantasies. And whether those fantasies were true or not, they gave the order a reputation that would echo long after its temple doors had closed. By the mid-1890s, the Golden Dawn's Paris temple was both feared and admired, its reputation magnified by secrecy, scandal, and whispers of forbidden rites. Yet no society built on such volatile foundations could endure for long. The very qualities that made the order irresistible, theatrical rituals, powerful personalities, and a culture of secrecy, also contained the seeds of its undoing. What followed was a slow but inevitable unraveling. By the close of the century, the once proud Golden Dawn was fractured, weakened, and its Parisian temple standing as a fading echo of past grandeur. The decline began with internal dissent. As the scandals surrounding Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathis grew louder, many of his disciples began to question his authority. He had long claimed that his leadership derived from the secret chiefs, invisible masters who supposedly guided the order from the shadows. At first, this claim lent him an aura of mystery and legitimacy. But as disputes multiplied, members began to doubt whether these secret chiefs existed at all. Was Mathis truly in contact with higher beings, or had he invented them to maintain power? The question was never resolved, but the suspicion that their leader was manipulating them for his own purposes corroded trust within the Paris temple. The London branch of the Golden Dawn soon broke openly with Mathis, accusing him of despotism, dishonesty, and reckless leadership. The schism was devastating. For years, the Paris temple had relied on its connection to the larger network of Golden Dawn lodges in Britain. Cut off from this support, Mathis and his wife Moina found themselves increasingly isolated. Instead of a unified society spanning two great cities, the order fractured into rival factions, each claiming to be the true inheritors of the Golden Dawn's wisdom. In Paris, this meant dwindling membership and mounting suspicion, as potential initiates hesitated to join an order at war with itself. Personal betrayals hastened the decline. Aleister Crowley, once a protege of Mathis, became his bitter rival. Their feud spilled into public, with accusations of treachery and even magical warfare. Crowley, with his gift for self-promotion, spread stories of dramatic confrontations and secret duels of willpower and sorcery between himself and Mathis. Whether these tales were exaggerations or pure invention hardly mattered. The damage was done. To the public, the Golden Dawn no longer looked like a disciplined esoteric order but like a nest of quarreling magicians consumed by ego and ambition. In Paris, where reputation was everything, this was a fatal blow. Financial troubles also played their part. Maintaining a secret temple with elaborate regalia, altars, and costumes required resources. The Mathis had relied on the patronage of wealthy supporters, but as rumors of scandal multiplied, many of these patrons quietly withdrew. Without their backing, the temple could no longer sustain the scale of rituals that had once impressed initiates. The grandeur of the ceremony shrank, and with it the sense of or that had drawn members in the first place. For an order that thrived on spectacle, the loss of resources meant the loss of power. By the late 1890s, defections became common. Some members abandoned occultism altogether, disillusioned by the bitter feuds and broken promises. Others joined rival societies, such as the Theosophical Society or Rosicrucian groups, which offered similar mysticism without the taint of scandal. Still others remained loyal to Mathis and Moina, but their numbers dwindled, and their influence outside the temple walls waned. Paris, once a fertile ground for esoteric fascination, moved on. New movements arose, new scandals captured attention, and the Golden Dawn slipped into the background. For Mathis himself, the decline was both professional and personal. Once the commanding figure at the center of a powerful order, he now appeared increasingly paranoid and defensive. Isolated in Paris, he lashed out at critics, insisting that he alone preserved the true wisdom of the Golden Dawn. His wife Moina stood faithfully at his side, continuing her work as visionary and artist, but together they appeared more embattled than inspired. The temple that had once glittered with ritual firelight now seemed more like a shadow play, its grandeur remembered more than lived. By the turn of the century, the Golden Dawn was a hollow shell of what it had been in its prime. In Paris, the Ahathua temple still flickered, but it was no longer the vibrant hub of occult activity it had once been. Without new initiates, without the energy of fresh scandal to draw attention, it began to wither. In London, splinter groups carried on fragments of the teachings, each claiming legitimacy, but none commanded the or that the unified Golden Dawn once had. The order had become a victim of its own contradictions, founded on secrecy but destroyed by exposure, built on unity but torn apart by ambition. And yet, even in decline, the Paris Golden Dawn left an indelible mark. The scandals that surrounded it ensured that it would never be forgotten. To some, it was a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition and ego corrupt spiritual pursuits. To others, it was a symbol of forbidden knowledge, a society that dared to peer into mysteries others feared. Its rituals, even in their distortion by gossip, inspired artists, writers, and occultists long after the temple itself fell silent. The aftermath of the Golden Dawn's decline was not only organizational but cultural. The order's teachings and fragments of its rituals leaked into other movements. Crowley carried aspects of its system into Thelema. Later occultists built upon its structure of grades, symbols, and invocations. Even in decline, the Golden Dawn had planted seeds that would grow in unexpected directions. Its Paris temple may have faltered, but its legacy was far from extinguished. By 1900, the great experiment that had once promised to unite mysticism, scholarship, and ritual in a single order had collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The Golden Dawn in Paris ended not with a dramatic final ritual or a catastrophic scandal, but with a slow fading, its members drifting away, its leaders isolated, its grandeur reduced to rumor. Yet that fading did not erase its story. Instead, it ensured that the Golden Dawn would forever linger as a ghost of the Belle Epoque, a reminder of a time when Paris dared to flirt with the forbidden and when the shadows of ritual magic flickered beside the lights of modernity. The Golden Dawn may have fractured in scandal and declined into obscurity by the early 20th century, but its influence did not vanish with the extinguishing of its temple candles. On the contrary, its legacy grew far beyond what Samuel and Moina Mathis could have imagined. The teachings, rituals, and structure of the Golden Dawn seeped into the bloodstream of modern occultism, shaping magical orders, new religions, and even the popular culture of the 20th century. The Paris experiment of 1895, though short-lived, was one of the sparks that ignited a fire still burning today. One of the most enduring contributions of the Golden Dawn was its system of graded initiation. Organized along the Kabbalistic tree of life, with each level representing a deeper stage of knowledge and power, this structure became the blueprint for countless later societies. The idea that spiritual progress could be mapped, tested, and marked through ceremonial advancement resonated with seekers long after the Golden Dawn itself had collapsed. Wiccan covens, modern ceremonial magic groups, and even certain strands of New Age spirituality owe their hierarchical structures to the framework established in those secret chambers of London and Paris. Equally significant was the Golden Dawn's synthesis of esoteric traditions. Before the order, most occult groups focused narrowly, some on Rosicrucianism, others on alchemy, others on spiritualism. The Golden Dawn combined them all, weaving together Kabbalah, astrology, tarot, Hermetic philosophy, and ritual magic into a single, coherent system. This eclectic approach, pioneered by Mathis and his fellow founders, allowed the order's influence to spread widely. Later occultists could draw from this vast toolkit, adapting it to their own purposes. Aleister Crowley, for instance, carried forward Golden Dawn practices into his own system of thelema, adding his unique, and controversial, stamp but never abandoning the foundation he had learned in the order. Crowley himself became one of the Golden Dawn's most notorious legacies. Though his relationship with Mathis ended in bitterness, his writings and teachings kept Golden Dawn practices alive in new forms. The rituals he adapted, the emphasis on willpower, and the blending of sex, mysticism, and ceremonial magic all bore the marks of his Parisian apprenticeship. Through Crowley, the DNA of the Golden Dawn passed into the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, into his own followers, and into the countercultural movements of the 20th century. Even today, Crowley's works remain central to Western occult practice, and behind them, one can still glimpse the shadow of Mathis' Paris temple. But Crowley was not the only heir. The Golden Dawn's impact can also be traced in Wicca, the modern pagan religion developed by Gerald Gardner in the mid-20th century. Gardner, though not a direct initiate, absorbed many Golden Dawn concepts through the broader occult community in Britain. The use of ritual tools, the wand, chalice, pentacle, and sword, was directly inherited from Golden Dawn symbolism. The invocation of the elements, the casting of protective circles, and even the structure of group ceremonies all show the unmistakable influence of Mathis' order. While Wicca presented itself as a revival of ancient witchcraft, its ritual DNA was as much Golden Dawn as it was pagan folklore. The Parisian flavor of the order, with its artistic connections, also left a lasting cultural imprint. Symbolist painters, poets, and dramatists who brushed against the Golden Dawn or its affiliates carried its imagery into their work. The idea of art as ritual, of theatre as a magical act, found fertile ground in Paris during the Belle Epoque and reverberated into 20th century avant-garde movements. Surrealists like André Breton, though not directly tied to the Golden Dawn, were influenced by the atmosphere of occult experimentation that societies like it had cultivated. The blending of mysticism and modern art, a hallmark of Parisian culture at the turn of the century, owed much to the Golden Dawn's presence. Even popular culture absorbed the echoes of the Golden Dawn. The tarot, once a niche tool for fortune-telling, became globally popular in large part due to the order's systematization of its symbolism. Members of the Golden Dawn created elaborate correspondences between tarot cards, astrology, and Kabbalah, interpretations that shape how the cards are read to this day. In the 1909 Rider-Waite Tarot deck, designed by Golden Dawn member Arthur Edward Waite and illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith, we see the direct artistic legacy of the order. This deck, now the most widely recognized tarot in the world, carries forward the Golden Dawn's vision every time it is shuffled, dealt, or read. The Golden Dawn's influence also extended into literature. Writers like W.B. Yeats carried their experiences into poetry that blended mystical imagery with modern themes. Later, occult references in fantasy and horror fiction often drew, knowingly or unknowingly, on Golden Dawn concepts. From H.P. Lovecraft's fictional grimoires to modern urban fantasy novels, the idea of secret orders, hidden rituals, and cosmic hierarchies reflects the imaginative landscape first popularized by groups like the Golden Dawn. The Paris Temple, though small, helped anchor these ideas in the cultural imagination of Europe's intellectual capital. Importantly, the Golden Dawn also normalized the idea of women as equals in occult practice. While mainstream society in the 1890s confined women to rigid roles, the Golden Dawn allowed them to lead rituals, attain high rank, and act as spiritual authorities. This innovation, radical at the time, carried forward into later movements. In Wicca, women became high priestesses. In modern occult groups, female leaders became commonplace. Moina Mather's presence in Paris was a key symbol of this shift, and her role as artist, seer, and leader helped lay the groundwork for women's central place in 20th century esotericism. In the decades following its decline, the Golden Dawn became less an organization and more a legend. Splinter groups preserved fragments of its teachings, scholars dissected its rituals, and seekers reinvented its practices. Yet its Paris chapter, though brief, held symbolic importance. Paris had been the stage on which the Golden Dawn transformed from an English experiment into a European phenomenon. The scandals that erupted there ensured its fame, but the cultural influence seeded in 1895 spread far beyond the city. Today, whenever tarot is read, whenever a circle is cast in a modern pagan ritual, whenever a ceremonial magician invokes elemental forces, the Golden Dawn is present. Its legacy is not just in books or surviving lodges but in the living practices of modern spirituality and culture. From Crowley's Thelema to Gardner's Wicca, from symbolist paintings to popular fantasy novels, the shadows of the Paris Temple stretch across more than a century. The Golden Dawn may have collapsed under the weight of scandal and betrayal, but its legacy is undeniable. In its rituals, we see the roots of modern ceremonial magic. In its symbolism, we see the foundation of modern tarot. In its egalitarian inclusion, we see the seeds of women's leadership in the occult. And in its scandals, we see the fascination of the modern world with secrecy, power, and forbidden knowledge. What Mathis and his circle began in Paris in 1895 did not die with them. It transformed, spread, and survived, long after the candles in the Ahathua Temple were snuffed out. Paris, 1895. A city of brilliance and contradiction, where the lights of the Belle Epoque burned against shadows that whispered of forbidden things. The story of the Golden Dawn in Paris is not simply a tale of one occult order. It is the story of a moment in history when progress and mystery collided, when modernity's glittering promise left space for darkness to creep in. In the secret chambers of the Ahathua Temple, behind curtained doors and guarded oaths, men and women donned robes, raised swords, traced pentagrams in candlelight, and spoke names they believed belonged to angels and gods. To some, it was theatre. To others, it was revelation. To many who heard only rumors, it was blasphemy. But whatever one believed, the Golden Dawn carved itself into the soul of Paris, leaving a scar that still fascinates more than a century later. What lingers most from this story is the paradox. Here was a city obsessed with progress, building electric grids, experimenting with cinema, and pushing the boundaries of science, yet it also became a sanctuary for mysticism. In the very decade when invention was transforming daily life, Parisian elites were whispering about blood sacrifices and angelic invocations in hidden temples. This tension is what made the Golden Dawn both possible and irresistible. It was not an escape from modernity, but a companion to it, a shadow cast by the very light of progress. The same minds who embraced technology hungered for mystery. The same salons that debated philosophy also flirted with seances. The Golden Dawn thrived because Paris, in that moment, wanted both the rational and the irrational, both the known and the unknowable. The decline of the order, its betrayals, its scandals, its bitter feuds, does not erase its significance. In fact, it deepens it. The implosion of the Golden Dawn reveals something universal, that human beings, when confronted with secrecy and the promise of power, will always wrestle with ambition and ego. Samuel Mathis built his temple as a sanctuary of wisdom, yet he ruled it with authoritarian fervor. Aleister Crowley entered as a seeker, yet left as a rival determined to tear it apart. Even the most mystical of societies are still human, bound by the same flaws and desires that drive politics, art, and war. The Golden Dawn's collapse is as much a lesson about human nature as it is about the occult. And yet, the echo remains. Long after the last ritual was performed in Paris, the imagery of the Golden Dawn survived. In tarot decks shuffled around the world, in Wiccan circles under the open sky, in novels and films filled with secret orders and forbidden rites, the shadows of 1895 linger. Paris gave the Golden Dawn not just a temple, but a stage, and once performed, its drama could never be forgotten. Even in its failure, it succeeded in seeding the imagination of generations to come. What is it, then, that still draws us to these stories? Perhaps it is the same hunger that drew Parisian aristocrats into candlelit chambers. The desire to believe there is more than the visible, that behind the world of wires, machines, and progress lies another reality waiting to be touched. The Golden Dawn embodied that desire in its purest form, dressing it in robes, arming it with swords, and giving it the language of ancient mysteries. And though its rituals are long over, that hunger remains in us still. When we look back at Paris in 1895, we see a city alive with contradictions, light and shadow, reason and superstition, brilliance and madness. The Golden Dawn was not an anomaly but a mirror, reflecting the human need for both knowledge and mystery. Its members may have believed they were invoking angels, but in truth they were invoking something even more powerful, the timeless human craving for the unknown. That craving is what makes the story of the Golden Dawn resonate even today. Imagine the flicker of candlelight in a silent chamber. Imagine robed figures chanting words half forgotten by history. Imagine the feeling of crossing a threshold into the forbidden, unsure whether you are stepping toward enlightenment or damnation. That was Paris in 1895. That was the Golden Dawn. And that is why, more than a century later, we still shiver at the thought of what may have happened in those hidden rooms, wondering whether the rituals were merely symbolic, or whether they truly opened doors that should have remained closed. The streets of Paris have long since moved on. The gas lamps have been replaced by neon. The salons have given way to cafes filled with laptops and glowing screens. But the shadows remain. Somewhere in the city's memory, the Golden Dawn still lingers, whispering of mysteries unsolved, secrets unspoken, and a time when the world's most modern city flirted with the darkest of dreams.